Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's program featuring James Rahn and his new book, Rittenhouse Writers Reflection on a Fiction Workshop. I'm honored to introduce James, and I'm also honored that my work is included in the collection portion of the book along such talents, to name a few, as Dan Biddle and Gwen Floria, Samantha Gillison, Alice Schell, and Tom Teti, who you'll also hear from tonight. We, meaning we, the members, those of us who have come through Rittenhouse Writers Workshops, have come through that collaborative process, are better writers as a result. We became, with James's urging, more willing to push the material, to refine more, to dig deeper, to be bolder, more daring, more discerning, more empathetic, and more honest. But enough about us, because this is about James and the book he's written, where he really moves beyond the fundamentals of writing. He talks about living. He gets really personal. He gets to the core, really to the soul. And I have to say, this book has its share of soul. Maybe it's the Atlantic City in him, but the book croons in places. We can almost hear him singing to Adrian, "Baby, I need your lovin'." We see the author's swagger, but more importantly, we see where he's vulnerable. Surely his intellect, his scholarly bent, his analytic skills are on full display throughout the pages of Rittenhouse Writers. So too are his misgivings, his longings, his doubts, his humanity. His humanity is really one of the book's triumphs. He lets us in and makes us laugh as the sweat pours down his face during the first workshop. We cry as we see his mother in a mauve-colored room under stark white sheets looking like a little doll. We hold our breaths when the nieces arrive. We root for them, for him. We witness his bodacious transition to loving parent. During the workshop and in the pages of this book, James is quick to intone that writing is hard work, but the material is worth the effort. We're reminded in Rittenhouse Writers that living is hard too. And when it's really good, the writing or a life, there is an intangible something that makes it so, a magic. In the introduction to the stories included in Rittenhouse Writers, James says, referencing the ethical society where the workshops are held, have been held for almost 30 years now, there is magic in that room above the square. It is a magic that he so deftly, so unsparingly, so honestly captures in these pages. It's now, I'm privileged to introduce to you James Rahn.
I think I can see most people now. Thanks, Diane, for that wonderful introduction. And I want to thank Andy Kahan and the library for hosting this event. I also want to say that Diane's great novel, Lazeretto, which came out a few months ago, will be available in paperback this April. If you haven't already gotten it, please get it. It's fabulous. I'm excited to be here looking at all the Rittenhouse Writers Group members and friends, the members of the Philadelphia writing community, my psychoanalytic buddies, and my niece McCall and my wife Adrian. As many of you know, I started the Rittenhouse Writers Group a long time ago, almost 30 years now, which makes it possibly the longest running independent fiction workshop in America. Thank you. I think we've had an effect on the Philadelphia writing scene, and I also believe we've had some effect on the literary landscape of the country. There have been so many fine novels and short stories that have come out of the group. Back when I started Rittenhouse Writers Group, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I know a little more now about teaching and writing and parenting, but there's still so much I don't know. I'll never know, but I keep searching. My mind's still compelled by the unanswerable questions. The key to writing good fiction, and I've said it a million times, is hard work. A commitment to your writing and a desire to accept the dark places that your stories will take you. Indeed, the mission may be to destabilize one's sense of oneself, which can be a good thing. To be fearless, to push through those moments when you become fearful, when your imagination twangs on the darker regions of your psyche. Surprises and developments will occur, along with greater self-acceptance and empathy, and your work will get better and better. I see the book Rittenhouse Writers Reflections on a Fiction Workshop as a Valentine for all the members of our group. It's our book. Hopefully it will inspire others to love writing and to write tenaciously and to teach with thoughtfulness and generosity. We want people to make the statement that only they can make. Enough sermonizing. I'm going to read a few pages from my memoir. Then Tom Teti is going to read. Then Diane's going to read. You're in for a treat. The book includes their stories and 8 others from group members. The book is worth buying just for the stories. I'm thankful that the 10 authors have allowed me to include their work alongside my memoir, but you should also know that there are many other great RWG stories that I could have included. That's for the next collection. Before I read, I want to thank the other 8 contributors: Dan Biddle, Gwen Florio, Samantha Gillison, Ramnesh Lamba, Karen Litvin, Lisa Paparone, Alice Schell, and Sarah Waldorf. I also want to thank my friend Margity Coe, who helped take this book to a higher level, and Paul Dry and his staff for producing such a fine book. Please give them a round of applause. Okay, I'm going to read a short section from chapter 6 of the book. It doesn't need any setup. The workshop was cutting into my writing. Reading, editing, critiquing, teaching was sapping my energy and creativity. At least that's what I thought at first. Then at some point I realized that teaching was easier than writing. Almost anything is easier than writing. Most of my life I've written in fits and starts. All my life I've loved the magic of the 26 little symbols that can conjure a world. As a kid I wrote poems. In 6th grade I won a gold medal in the Atlantic City Poetry Contest. A teacher drove me around to school assemblies and trotted me out in my tiny bow tie and thick black-framed Henry Kissinger glasses, and I read my verses to all the seat-squirming kids. I wrote stories that I read aloud in front of my classes. My schoolmates applauded. It felt great. In college, I wrote stories that shocked my classmates and professors. I liked Edgar Allan Poe and horror films, and I adopted this material and tried to intensify it. I also used a lot of profanity and slang, even when it didn't suit the characters. I liked how my stories affected people, and I loved how I felt, leaning over a legal pad, pencil in hand, inventing frightful scenes. After college, I started writing a novel based on my teenage years in Atlantic City and some of the craziness I saw, which had led me to quit high school and eventually get a GED, a good enough diploma. Then I got a corporate job in New York, which lasted almost 2 years and required a zillion hours a week. When I wasn't working, I was partying or sleeping after partying. I worked on the novel intermittently. Again, writing is hard. Writing a novel even harder. It requires hubris plus a marathon runner's commitment. You got to put in your hours or it ain't going to happen. Most of the time you're looking for excuses not to write. Working, doing chores, exercising, scrolling the net, all can become bigger priorities. After quitting the New York job, I began pinballing around the country trying to figure out what I wanted to do with myself. I traveled to San Francisco, Nashville, New York, Miami. I worked a ton of jobs, everything from ditch digging to selling suntan lotion down the beach. I took the novel with me and stayed with friends or girlfriends, then returned to Atlantic City, where my mother lived, where she always welcomed me back. I fancied myself the poet Maudit. A couple of years later, I finished a first draft, a very bad first draft, which I called Getting Dumb. The title referred to the stance a half-intelligent guy had to take in order to hang out with the bad guys. I tinkered with the book, but it was discouraging work. I felt dumb most of the time, with little clue how to revise it. Who was I kidding? Me, a writer? No, I had to make money. Part of me wanted a conventional, upscale profession, lawyer, businessman. Another part felt the pressure to write and be heard. I went to Miami Beach, South Beach to be exact, to be with my girlfriend of many years, whom I was supposed to marry, and wound up settling there. I was 28. South Beach at the time was a dissolute neighborhood split between young Cubans and elderly Jews. Versace and Madonna hadn't arrived yet to make it seem cool. I kept messing with the novel, even wrote a couple stories and sent them out, but they got turned down. I continued to look for employment. After a million rejections, my BA in English, no help, I landed a job at the renowned Fontainebleau Hotel. But it wasn't a desk clerk, bellhop, car jockey gig where I could interact with the chi-chi clientele. No, I was offered a position putting vinyl straps on metal chaise lounge frames. The finished chairs would eventually support the well-oiled, sunbathing bodies up on the pool deck. The man who hired me, handsome, bronze, with his black hair slicked back and glistening like a wet seal's, took me down in the freight elevator into the bowels of the hotel. The space was literally a shit-staking, dimly lit, pipe-dripping, mesothelioma-laden, trash and dust-filled cavern, 50 yards long and 25 yards wide, with chaise lounge frames stacked high against a lesioned wall. In the middle of this expanse sat a large wooden barrel. The man pointed to it and we walked over. Inside were hundreds of 3-foot-long white straps and one industrial-strength blow dryer. "Let me show you how we do it," he said. He marched off and grabbed the frame, came back, set it down, pulled out a strap, plugged in the blow dryer, and proceeded to yank and stretch the band, simultaneously heating it in order to hook it from one side of the structure to the other. "Woo," he said after he finished. He wiped sweat from his forehead. $4 a chair. See you in a few hours. First, I nearly burned off one hand. That blow dryer radiated blazing heat. Next, I ruined multiple straps by overcooking and melting them into useless fettuccine. It took me an hour of pulling, straining, almost liquefying about 50 straps to finish one chair. When I was done, I was so tired I laid down on it and fell asleep. Maybe I dreamed about a better life. I awoke to the rattling wheels of canvas carts. A line of maids, perhaps just off the boat from Haiti or Cuba, were pushing them along the periphery of my dungeon. The carts were piled high with dirty sheets and towels. The women stared at me, shrugged, and shook their heads. I was beginning to think it wasn't hip to sink this low. Still, it was a heck of a lot easier than writing. Thank you. Our next reader is Tom Teti. Tom's a legendary actor in the Philadelphia region and beyond, a great writer and friend, blessed with a huge imagination. Tom.
Thank you. James asked me to put together a couple of lines to read, and that's not what I gave him. I talked about how easy it is for me to be rejected as an actor because I've been rejected as a writer. So I'm really an expert. Thank you all. It's a great honor to be here. And I feel compelled, if you read an article in the Inquirer yesterday, to correct it. It said that I wrote something called Miracle at Philadelphia. I did not. I recorded it once upon a time on 12 cassette tapes for the bicentennial. Nobody bought that either. So, so what you need to know here is that there's a young boy going to confession with a priest that he has never met before and has never confessed to. There was always a darkness in the booth before the priest slid his shutter aside and began saying those mysterious Latin incantations that seal the pact in ritual. To Nick, it was an inviting, seductive darkness, a deep shadow that lured one into a feeling of warmth and safety. It was God, Nick knew he was supposed to believe, the Almighty, who threw his arms around you, and in this sheltered quarter where you knelt to free yourself of yourself, where your bad deeds were erased from the record, all violations rendered forgettable, where the hurt of exposing yourself to a stranger was exchanged for the mercy of the Lord on high. It was God bringing relief to the grateful and contrite, deciding not to condemn you to hell, for another week at least. The window slid open. Father Bonsell began, In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. A rumbling invocation, stentorian and utterly unapologetic. Nick did not feel any peace in Bonsell's presence. Begin, the order came. Please bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been 1 week since my last confession. Go ahead. I have cursed. I have lied to my mother and father. I have been disobedient in school. There was a form to the confession, things that he always said so as not to feel ridiculous. The students had to go every week, and it was sometimes hard for Nick to do anything confessable in that time. He went to school, played sports, ate dinner, did homework, watched television, slept, then started over the next day. No one had ever said it was fine to go in and say, I've had a pretty good week, Father. He was instructed to be a sinner, and a sinner he would be. Nick's formulaic confession, like many of the other boys, started with lying, which was, ironically, always believable. Then moved to disobedience, also believable. Then to misbehavior, like talking or laughing during Mass, also easily believable. At the end came an obligatory salute to the more prurient offenses, bundled together in a trinity of its own, impure thoughts, words, and deeds. Perhaps some of the kids had real, juicy, first-hand sins to confess. Perhaps Bugsy Malatesta and all the others, who had been left behind so many times that they were 16 and just finishing 8th grade, had authentic experiences to trade for mercy. Nick had no such exploits. He and his friends padded their resumes in the confessional because they were always convinced of their guilt. They didn't need to have done the sin to be sorry for what they would be doing if they could. It was smoothed over by nice priests like Father Conroy. In Father Bonsell's booth, the quality of mercy was indeed strained. There was neither patience nor compassion nor anything like love wafting through the bubbled screen. The round, bespectacled head issued instead pious wrath and the power of God. Nick did not want to call him Father. Come on, the priest's voice exploded like a bomb in a subway station. I have engaged in impure thoughts, words, and deeds, Nick recited in a soft voice, hoping the priest's preoccupation would send the tedious child out of the booth with a good act of contrition and maybe 10 Hail Marys and 10 Our Fathers. What? Nick didn't know what to say. Father Conroy had never asked him for more. He recalled Bugsy's telling him to keep it short. Come on. Pardon me, Father? Nick felt his voice getting smaller. I can't hear you. Come on. Father, if I can't hear you, the Lord can't hear you. Sorry, Father, What have you done? Tell me. And then Nick blurted out, I have impure thoughts when I look at Eleanor Donlin and Maureen Pfeiffer and Alicia Randazzo. But that's all I ever did, and you can't expect that not to happen. And maybe, I don't mean to, but boners or erections during Mass, I'll try to stop. I will. But I don't do it, the jerk thing. Not yet. I haven't. I mean, I touch myself in the bathtub. It feels good, but I don't do it for long, really. And I've never even touched a girl, let alone kissed one. In the silent space Nick offered him, Father Bonsell released his thunderous voice again, impersonating the outrage of the Almighty. How old? The words emerged from underground. There was no real question. There was a foregone conclusion that he, Nick, the little sinner, was disgracefully young to carry such blights on his soul, which would be damned, 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 unless Father Bonsell could drive out the evil that had taken hold of him. What? Nick said. How old are you? 13. 13. My God. Oh, my God. Nick began to shake. He was sure that the entire church had heard. He felt as if the whole world was shaking. He tried not to look directly at the priest through the window, but he couldn't help himself. The figure of Bonsell held the top of his head in a cradle, formed by his index finger and thumb. The rest of his fingers were splayed out in the air, as if he dare not sully any more of himself by touching the head that had been made unclean by all that he'd been hearing. Bonsell's next words descended like a moaning meteor from a distant galaxy. You play with yourself. You seek impure gratification from your body. You must stop now. Yes, Father. Nick's mind, right. Nick's mind left the booth for a moment, wondering what his classmates and the nuns had heard. What did you say? I said yes. Yes, what? Yes, Father. What? Yes, Father. Stop, do you hear? I do. It is impure, do you hear me? Yes, Father. You will stop. You hear me? I hear you. Father. The priest took 3 deep breaths in the silence, and to Nick they sounded as bombastic as his words. Say 2 rosaries and an act of contrition. Father Bonsell shut the window on him as Nick began a prayer that initiates the release from the wages of sin. Oh my God, I'm heartily sorry for having offended thee, and I detest all my sins. Nick couldn't tell if Father Bonsell heard his apology to God and his plea for forgiveness. He couldn't even be sure he was absolved. All he knew is that it was time to leave. He made his way to the altar, slowly, stunned. How was he going to say 2 rosaries at the altar without drawing attention to himself? Because his penance would take 45 minutes minimum, even if he sped through it. Everyone would think he'd murdered his beloved parents. Or worse. Halfway to the altar rail, he saw Sister Ludmilla nodding off in the middle pew, a small singular stroke of good fortune. The faces of his classmates, however, waiting in line to make their own confessions, seemed to show that they knew the awful things he had done. Good girls, future nuns like Kathleen Guigan and Mary Paluzzo, looked away, eyes filled with horror and disdain. Bad girls, especially Noreen Dehart, thin and pigeon-toed in her sloppily ironed gray-tinted blouse and drooping knee socks, gave him a lingering glance and smirked. Noreen was famous for inviting inexperienced boys over for comics and lemonade and other stuff after school because her mother worked and no one would be home. She raised a fuzzy eyebrow as Nick passed her that just about sealed the offer right there in the nave. Bugsy Malatesta, his paltry penance completed, and on his way back to his pew, passed Nick, shook his head, and sniggered, pretending to look at his prayer hands. Nick fell onto the altar at the altar rail. Each movement he made was watched very closely, he was sure of it. But the painted face of God the Father, with his white beard and flowing mane of white hair, being ministered to by cherubim, did not look down from the dome above the sacristy. The statue of Mary, the Blessed Mother, usually permitted the fantasy that her eyes returned the supplicant's gaze, but was frozen stiff today. The large crucifix of Jesus, straight before him, though depicting an expired Lord, looked to the side, hands bleeding, body slumping, feet impossibly held to the beam by a single nail, had most life in it. It spoke to him. It did. It's all right, Nick. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tom. That was fabulous. Next, we have Diane McKinney-Whetstone. Another wonderful writer and friend who's written 6 highly acclaimed novels. She's currently working on her 7th novel, Diane.
Thank you, James. I'll be reading a portion of a short story that I actually, when I thought about it, wrote 20 years ago. Moon Penitent is the title. So I'll try to stop at a cliffhanger so that you can read the rest of it in the book. The moon was a dot in the sky as Cartha watched her husband Raymond come home. He was a capable accountant, but fairly impotent when it came to her needs, the deep needs nestled in her softness, like that spot the size of a dime that the doctors had assured would be easy to shrink. She thought about the spot and the dot of the moon against the navy-glazed sky as Raymond laughed his way onto the porch. A stranger with him, always bringing someone home to fix things, the dishwasher hose, the motion sensor on the upstairs deck, the timer on the gas grill. This one was tall and thin and dark as the space surrounding the moon. His shirt was a baby blanket blue and made of cotton gauze. A red twisted licorice protruded from the pocket of the blue gauze like an upturned drill bit. "Babe, meet Cole," Raymond said as he leaned into the porch swing and mashed his lips against Cartha's cheek. "Never believe it, babe. I'm at the gym. Stopped at the gym after work. That's why I'm late. Anyhow, I'm doing the life cycle, complaining to the guys about the damn closet door being off the track, how I got that crap all over my hands, axle grease, or whatever the hell it was when I tried to fix it earlier." "And let me guess," Cartha interrupted in a voice that sounded like it wanted to fall asleep. "Cole here is an expert on sliding glass doors." "No expert," that's all Cole said. Then he extended his hand to Cartha and smiled. Cartha thought that his hand was too large for his slender build, and his smile too slow, at least that his mouth took time to catch up with the rest of his face when he smiled. She ignored his hand and stared instead at the moon. "She doesn't mean to be rude," Raymond whispered as he motioned Cole in through the front door. "Hasn't been feeling well, otherwise lovely wife. Couldn't ask for a better wife." His voice drifted, and Cartha didn't strain to hear. She was angry that he'd brought another stranger home, not the crackling anger that used to leap like a brush fire when the wind was right, but a muffled one, like a low groan, covered with wool and pressed deep inside where the dark spot was growing. She pushed her bare feet against the wooden planks of the porch floor to get the to and fro motion of the swing. The air had been still and thick with moisture, but now it moved with the swing and even lifted her hair, weighted down in locked tussles. She at least hoped this stranger would stay until she fell asleep. She couldn't tolerate Raymond's cheeriness, his monologue about how uncanny that he should run into this guy at the time they needed him most. She did fall asleep until she felt Raymond lift her tiny, sagging body from the swing. She kept her eyes closed while he carried her up the stairs and pressed her gently into the bed and covered her feet with the white down comforter. The ceiling fan clicked predictably as she listened again to Raymond cry. The moon was a small crescent and reminded Cartha of the jewelry the 52nd Street vendors sold on green felt-covered tables in front of Hakeem's bookstore. She could smell the incense and oils, almost taste the lemon pound cake she'd buy from the cookie jar when she still had her appetite and could swallow well. She stared at the moon and thought about the city, how long it had been since she'd barreled through its caverns on the train. Raymond insisted she not drive in, even when she'd still had the strength to drive. They'll kill you, stalk you, he threatened. Car like ours, they'll kill you for, stuff you in the trunk like a rag doll. She pushed her bare feet against the porch to move the swing to the beat of Raymond's voice in her head. She wondered where he was anyhow, wondered if maybe the carjackers had gotten him, stuffed him in the trunk every night this week as late as he'd been. She stopped the swing when she heard footsteps, thought that she would try to pull together enough strength to greet him standing for a change, but she was tired. And then it wasn't even Raymond making his way up the steps. Nothing like him. This figure was taller, darker, the one who'd fixed the sliding glass door. Raymond's not here. She said it quickly, as if her weak voice had the power to stop a determined man in his tracks. He did stop, though. They all did. When they showed up a few days after they made right, whatever Raymond had said leaked or hung wrong, or was cracked or frayed or confused, one had even told him that wiring gets confused. They'd stop at the sound of her voice, in deference to her frailty, she thought. This one, Cole, leaned slightly in a bow, showed his hands as he did, and said, "I don't mean to disturb you, Cartha. May I call you Cartha?" And not waiting for a reaction, slipped into the chair across from the white wicker swing where Cartha sat straight and still. "I just left Raymond at the gym. Said he's got to go back to the office. High-powered account he's on, so I just thought I'd come by and check on you. You know, sit with you for a while." She scanned his shirt as he talked. The shirt was cotton gauze and naturally wrinkled. She moistened her lips when she saw the red twisted licorice peeking from his shirt pocket, her favorite little girl candy. She wanted to ask for it, wanted to stretch it and break it into bite-sized pieces she could chew on for a while. But it would take too much work. "Did he send you?" she asked instead. "He didn't send me. He told me you're sick, though. I hope you don't mind." "That he told you? Or that you just popped over here unannounced?" "I like your hair." Cole ignored her question as he sat forward in the chair and leaned his arms against his knees. "It's very political. First thing I noticed about you the other night." "No politics, just too tired to comb it. It's all I can do to watch it." She watched his face. He didn't believe her. She could tell by the way his eyebrows came together in a V. Raymond had believed her. After she patiently twisted each wisp of her hair to nudge it into locks, he'd offered to get someone over there to fix it up for her. Now that they left the city, he told her, she couldn't just let her hair grow wild like those Jamaican Rastas. And when she'd insisted that she didn't have the energy to keep it up, he'd relented, said it would be okay, only until she was able to start going out again. She leaned slowly against the swing back and started a gentle to and fro. "So you noticed my hair, so I noticed your hands." She watched his eyebrows curve up in a question. "What about my hands?" he asked as he extended them into the moonlight and almost touched her to-the-floor dress. "Too large for the rest of you." "They are, yes, I know they are," he said. "From shooting up?" He nodded. "I should have known that you would know. Your husband told me that you're smart, quite smart." "Not all that smart. I used to be close to some people who did that when I lived in the city, raised in the city, you know." "Well, this must be hard for you, living way out here. You miss it, don't you?" "What's to miss? Drive-bys, guard always up, half-dead men soaking up the rank steam from sidewalk vents." She said it with determination, kept her saucer eyes wide open. Raymond used to tell her that he knew when she was lying because her baby doll eyes went to slits. She didn't want this Cole to think he understood her. Next thing, he'd think he knew her well enough to ask her how it felt to die. "And you like your hair. I noticed that about you, too," he said as if he'd read her mind. "Well, I noticed your eyes smile before your mouth." "Meaning?" "Meaning your reaction's sluggish. Meaning you're still shooting up." "Well, I admit it," he laughed softly. "I did it before I came over here the other night, only because I'd be working. Helps me concentrate." "And tonight?" "I'm not working tonight. Like I said, I only came to sit with you a while." "Rittenhouse's cheaper." "What?" "If you really want to concentrate, Rittenhouse's cheaper than heroin. Thought shooting up went out with disco anyhow." She turned to stare at the crescent moon. The moon relaxed her, and so did his presence on the porch. She thought that if she looked at him now, his face would be opened in a smile. She noticed that about him, too. He had an expansive face that widened when he looked at her, as if to give his face more room for drawing her presence in. The wicker creaked as she shifted on the swing, and the fluffy white pillows exhaled softly. So you came to sit, so you're sitting. The moon was half full and hanging low as Carter stilled the swing and fought the sleep that was covering her like the dark cottony air. Raymond was late, had been late every night that week. He'd be late again tonight, he told her. Big account, very big, so big he might have to work all night long. Might as well pack a change of clothes just in case. Would she be okay, he'd asked. Should he call the hospice and arrange for someone to stay the night? She insisted not. She liked the still quiet. But this quiet was irritating now as it pranced through her head and mocked her in this oversized house on the private road, the house that Raymond had promised would be perfect for raising children far away from the decadence of city life. She imagined him at his late-night desk with his spreadsheets and Mont Blanc pens, working with sterile, passionless intensity to maintain their lifestyle. It was easier for her to imagine him that way. She fell asleep on that image until much later she felt herself being lifted from the swing. She kept her eyes pressed shut so that she didn't have to hear the litany of, "Sorry I'm late again, babe." She let her head roll away from his chest the way someone in a deep sleep would. Her locked hair dropped and swayed and pulled at her scalp as he moved up the steps. She hated this part. The way he just let her head dangle and bob like she was already dead. The cramps she'd get in her neck while her head bounced roughly as he took his time up the steps, punishing her with heavy, erratic foot stomps. By the time he reached the bedroom, it felt like he would just toss her down in disgust or even hurl her against the scalloped wooden moldings that framed the wall. But then he'd soften, maybe from the vanilla scented candles she'd burned, the ones she'd bought on South Street when she'd had her palms read. His humanity would return, and he'd place her gently down. Except tonight, these footsteps were lighter, these arms stronger. Tonight he cradled her, protected it with his arms, moved his fingers through her scalp as he carried her up the steps. Tonight she felt his heart beat as she nestled her head against his chest, and then the texture of his shirt against her cheek, the cracked softness of cotton gauze. Tonight he stopped midway up the stairs to press his mouth against hers. She kissed him back with lips that were fleshy and full, the only part of her that still had a fullness to it. She smelled the licorice on his breath, tasted it, opened her mouth wider to draw in more of the taste, to swallow it up. And I'll stop there.
Hello? Anyway, we're happy to take some questions and answers from the audience. Anything. I'll deflect it to Tom and Diane.
The only rules are that you raise your hand and please wait for the microphone because we've got as many people watching at home as are in this room and we want them to hear the questions. Who would like to start us off? Right in front here. Here's a mic to your left.
Hi, my name's Sabrina. Thank you for coming and sharing your work with us. My question to you is the excerpts that you've all read tonight, are they in the Rittenhouse book that's available once we leave?
I can answer that question. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And there's many other really terrific stories in there too. So, but yeah, everything's in there.
Diane and Tom, before we go back to the audience, I wonder if you'd tell us how long each of you has been a part of the writers group, what you sort of get out of it, and talk a bit about James's teaching style, if you would.
His teachings. Actually, I was part of the writing group when I started. I was working on my first novel. I had just one chapter. I was working on my first novel, Tumbling, and joined the writers group then. And I think the first thing I got was validation that this was what I was doing was worth my time and effort, because at that point, not many people knew that I was seriously working on fiction. And so I got validation. I appreciated the time and attention that people gave the story, the pages I would turn in. Of course, initially I only turned in the very best, most polished, so that to try to exempt it from critique. Still was critiqued. But I appreciated the time and attention, the thoughtfulness, the care that people took with the work, because, I mean, initially the work is really fragile, and the writer is also very fragile. So that was especially helpful. I think James's writing style is one of coach. I mean, he will point out things that in the pieces, you know, with exhaustive comments on the pages we turn in. But beyond that, and even during the workshop, he created an atmosphere of collaboration and an atmosphere so that the comments would be helpful, and not just to take something apart just for the sake of taking it apart, that it would mean something and that it would help the writer to improve the work.
I've been part of I first came, I think, in 2000, and I've been in the group off and on since that time, and don't think I can improve on Diane's description of James' style. He has this, he elicits from the other members around the table what they would like to contribute, and tries, I think everybody gets the message that we're trying to help whoever it is make what they've done better. So it is very much like a coach and a mentor and a colleague. I think he never loses track of the fact that he is also trying to write and write better all the time. And I believe that of him, and that's what I was like a kid, kind of peeking out into a whole new room when I started, and not sure if I was going to take a step, and then I would take one, and then maybe am I going to take another? Yeah, okay, I'm going to take another, and then pretty soon I'm in the same seat at the table all the time. So.
It's a good seat.
It's right next to the left hand of the father here.
Another question from the audience? Yes, right here in the third row. If you could keep your hand up, please, Mike will come right to you.
Thank you. My name is Pat Black, and I appreciate all of your work, and I've followed Diane's work for many, many years, since Tumbling. And my question is for Diane and Tom. It sounds like you've been working with James, or been a part of his life and his work for a long time, and now that you are seasoned writers, I wanted to find out what has led you to remain with him over these years.
You went first last time. All right.
These are tough questions.
I think that it's brought so much of what I wanted to me that I didn't know I wanted, and before I'd gone to Rittenhouse Writers, I spent a little time in a couple of other groups. And there wasn't the same kind of aspiration from the entire group, I don't think. And it's everything that people do is honored in the same way. It all has the same trajectory for James, and I believe in that. I taught school for a little while before I became a professional actor, and I taught acting for many years too. And that I don't know if I ever told it, but I agreed with what he was trying to do.
Yeah, I actually haven't been a part of the group for several cycles now, but I continued even after the publication of my first novel, primarily to get feedback, because I need to hear other people's comments. And by the time I got to the second novel, I had worn my family out. For the sake of my marriage, I just couldn't. My husband if he didn't have the exact reaction that I wanted, you know, it was a problem. So I just really needed feedback, critique. I needed for people to point out to me the parts that they thought were working or were not working, and so I continued even after the first novel for several cycles.
James, how do you draw the line between critic and coach when you're working with a group? And I know Diane and Tom, you can speak to this as well, I'm sure.
Well, I think that I want to. I always go in. I try to find the good in every piece, and I try to accentuate that, and I try to. The critical part is not. It's not done in any kind of a nasty way. I mean, it's just I'm always rooting for the author, and I'm always rooting for the piece, and I'm always trying to figure out how to make the work better according to each author's particular vision. So I don't know if that's quite the answer between coach and critic, but there's the supportive aspect, and then there's also the analytic aspect. So,
well,
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I once took lots of classes in my field. I was in a ballet class one time. Yeah, and the teacher said how good I was, and I knew that was just crap. So, but there's a gift that or a line you have to walk that says that you have to be honest and yet mean well by people, and I think that's why he sweats every week.
I'm sweating now.
And I think there's also cluing in. There's a kind of cluing in that happens when I've turned in some pages, and I really want them to be perfect, and I've convinced myself that they're pretty close to perfect. Mm-hmm. Except that I know deep down that they're very far from perfect, and I kind of know the places where it falls short. And so often those are the points that the group would make and that James would make, the very places that I knew needed work, where maybe even the fatal flaws were. And so I think that takes a certain skill to, as James said, tap into the vision that the author has for the work, and then help them to realize it.
Sounds tricky. There's a lady in the sixth row here.
Yes.
Thank you. Hi. So I have a couple of questions for you.
Is that Lee?
It is.
Yeah, okay.
So to James.
Yes.
What do you do when your vision of the story diverges from the author's vision? And to Tom and Diane, how do you figure out who to listen to in the group and who not to?
Well, okay. If I feel very strongly about where a piece is going off the track, I think I may push that a little harder than I would with just regular criticism. If the ending just feels like it's really off, or some dramatic part that's not exactly working or needs to go further, it needs to be shortened. Again, if I feel strongly about it, but there's so much gray area. I don't quite feel that I know exactly what the mission of the story is, and I have to be careful how to separate myself from my preferences, and try to be very attuned to the demands of the story. What I want to say is, if I really feel strongly about it, I will make the point to the author, either in the workshop or outside of the workshop. So,
yeah, and I think the quantity of response is helpful. If there are 12 people sitting around a table and 11 of them are saying similar things, I think, maybe this is something I need to pay attention to. And so the quantity helps. And beyond that, it's you know, if a comment just seems to come from out of left field, which can certainly happen, and I just kind of know, I'm just kind of intuitively to disregard it. So, I mean, a lot of it has to do with intuition. A lot of it has to do with exactly what it is that I am trying to do with the story. And if the comments depart wildly from that, then I have some decisions to make about, I'm going to discard this, I won't listen to this. But more times than not, if a lot of people are saying a similar thing about a certain point, then that's something that I'll definitely
pay attention to.
Yeah, I think that's right. That is right usually. And if everybody says something different, it's done. Just don't pay attention to them at all.
It's sometimes it's very hard to get a consensus in the group, but as Diane's pointing out, if there's enough people in the group that are describing something that's not exactly working, they're raising that doubt, then it's something that we all should pay attention, or the author should pay attention to. But sometimes we're in like 6 people feel this way and 6 people feel that way, and then it's like, ultimately it comes down to the author has to have a certain confidence to make those fundamental changes, choices, decisions. Yeah.
Sometimes you find out there really wasn't much of a mission. That you needed more of a mission before you came into it. You enjoyed doing it and did it,
There's a lady all the way in back there.
Hi, my name's Catherine, and I've never written anything, and I've never gone to any of these groups, so I feel like sort of an outsider. Is it possible you can explain the mechanics of how this works? Like, does everyone turn in pages to everyone else to comment on the next week, or I just don't get the...
Each week, so there's the workshop runs 8 weeks, and each week 2 or 3 members of the group submit work to be critiqued by the group the following week. So everybody in the group gets 2 or 3 days to look at the manuscripts and then write comments. I ask everybody to write comments on the manuscripts, erring on the side of positivity. And so that's basically it. Every week there's 2 or 3. They're either stories or novel excerpts that people are handing in. And the word limit, which is almost an inviolable rule for the Rittenhouse Writers Group, is 7,500 words per submission.
They're submitted by email, so everybody gets them.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Anne Marie, and I'm working on a novel of historical fiction based in Philadelphia right now that has a very strong narrative voice. And I'm interested in Tom's, the interplay between acting and your voice that you develop and how that works through the writing, because I feel like that's the way it's working through my novel right now. So I was wondering if you would share with me some of how you translate what you hear and how you work that into your writing.
Now I'm scared. If I understand the question, I'm not sure. I think that I find two things similar in both pursuits, and that's an inner ear that is attuned to not just what's said, but what's behind it, and I try to put that also into fiction. But I think if you have been writing a long time, and did you study history too in school?
Yes, but I was an English major, but I guess I should give you the backstory. A lot of what I hear is because I'm a musician as well, and I came from an Irish family who was all about storytelling. and how you hear something. And what you were describing about the confessional spoke to me, because you hear there's always these voices that you can't get away from.
Yes.
And I find that
somebody
very
like that.
interesting, how to translate that to paper. So I guess maybe that would give you more information.
Music is an interesting thing because it's another language, and you're putting it, using probably everything about what you're doing is influenced by rhythm and meter and timing, and so and for somebody coming out of the theater, it's also because I've worked with scenes that go on until they're done for so long that there's a certain time that it seems like it's, you know, you're going to arrive at this is a dramatic point where things change or shift. So it's going to make me think. I'm not sure that I can say. Maybe, you know, I can think about it some more. What the voice does. I mean, and the great question is, people always think it's because of what I do that the dialogue is the way it is, and maybe I was always that way, and that's why I went into the theater. I don't know. So that wasn't very much help, and it was long too.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but we're ending with a laugh tonight. Please join me in thanking James Rahn, Tom Teti, and Diane McKinney-Whetstone.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you.